Okay, pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made whether perceived or unperceived by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. Minutes from last month's meeting, any comments, additions?
Morning, guys.
Morning.
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 Come on in.
Motion to accept minutes from last,
Motion made.
Yes.
second, favor?
Aye.
Okay,
There's some
can we
warrants to
sign,
be signed.
yeah, if you could sign the minutes from last month's meeting, with your names there signed. I'm sorry, that's June's, rather. Okay, for warrant, we have our staff board treasurer payroll reimbursement warrant, refund warrant, and 2 expense warrants. And other backups there for it.
I'm on this one.
Okay, as that goes around, distributed in your packets. For the following, June's 2016 accounting reports, June 2016 Prim Board update, PERAC 2015 annual report.
Place those on file.
Please place on file.
Right.
Second.
Okay.
Yep.
Annual summary of conflict of interest law acknowledgement to be signed by all members. Christian Gupta requested contract.
The conflict of interest thing, before you go forward,
Yeah.
did everybody sign the
Yeah.
last page of that, and can that be turned in, please? Where's that from a minute?
Just the signature page, was that the only thing that went around, or was there more?
There was another page to this,
There is?
to the minutes, yeah.
Wait a minute, maybe it's laying around here. There we go. There it is.
Yeah.
You wanted to take it home instead of...
Yeah.
They must have,
Even though I have
This-
a copy, I keep it.
Posterity.
put this
All
in
right, just see
the
if I can get that paper. One of these pages.
Can't find it, Chris.
Okay, and there were 4 of these.
Excuse me.
One sidetrack.
All right, so for the conflict of interest things, I have Arthur's, Bob's, and Mark's. So Dave and Christian. You need to.
We'll sign it
Yeah,
there.
last page of that.
Yes.
Just the last page is all I need.
Last page of this one.
Yeah. Dave, do you have yours? Okay.
Right here.
I just need the last page from that as a reference. Okay, so those are fine.
You're good. We're all signed, we're all good. I believe next up is Christian.
I will.
Request to contract with outside auditor for GASB 6768.
How do I do that?
That's probably right.
One minute, you want to join, please?
Sure.
You all know
Yes.
Mary, and
Yes.
I'll let you, well, my recommendation basically is that, we should go with it, and we talked about it many times, and has to be done, it's required by the statutes that we have in place for the accounting standards, and it's for the, basically all the constituent members of the retirement board, basically city, housing authority, Diamond, they all need, I'm getting requests from everybody to get it done as soon as possible. And if not, it's gonna end up as a qualification on the audit reports for all of them. So it has to be done, instead of, trying to make it more difficult or trying to create more and more issues, I think we should go with it, and we figure out a solution. Diamond and Housing Authority is willing to pay for it, city's gonna pay for it, so there's no cost to the retirement board per se at all.
Okay, well,
I see no reason why the retirement board would not want to have its books audited and numbers audited.
well, I do, okay?
I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I do. The fact is that Attorney Sacco has crafted it, and said, we are not required to do this. We should not do this, because this is just another factor in an equation that makes it more complicated. And there's absolutely no reason for it. And I'm looking at this letter about in a perfect world, when in a perfect world, I already see an issue with this. I already see an issue. They've split the cost of the audit 3 ways.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's not, what happens later on with if the fiduciaries over at the retirement board realize that they're being overcharged. We don't get 1/3 of the retirement costs from the people at the housing authority, we get it per capita. So they're gonna complain that they're being overcharged for an audit because they don't have enough people
the
in there.
Diamond and Housing Authority has already agreed.
Well,
And-
maybe
and let me-
somebody,
no,
let me, I got the floor, Mr. Gupta. Look, I'm not gonna sit here and argue about it. We have enough fiduciary responsibility. This is an assumption that we don't need to make by law, and it's my recommendation to the board that we don't do this. Because you're not gonna convince me that shifting this responsibility over to us is gonna make this cleaner. It's gonna make it worse. Because as you know, the city does not have a great track
The
record.
retirement board has to provide the information.
Well,
to
we
the
can
auditor,
provide information, but we're not.
and has to sign the representation letter that all the information has to be
Yeah.
provided.
And it also says, Parac also said we're gonna have to go out for an RFP, and I'm gonna tell you right now, if we go out for an RFP, I'm not gonna hire this company, the company we do hire, I'm gonna ask them to make the first audit a forensic audit, because I don't trust the city books. It's that simple.
That's your opinion.
Well, it's not my opinion. It's not my opinion.
It is your opinion.
You have $44,000 of employee money
It is your-
that's being
it is
that's
your-
being that's
it is-
being put back into the insurance trust fund, which by statute, as you well know, it's required to be in a separate fund. How did money get into another fund, and you have to reimburse this money that's required by law to be segregated? You are not, that's not your money. You are a fiduciary for that. And I just, and yesterday,
You're getting on a topic which is doesn't
well,
relate to here.
it's
No,
about
but- no,
numbers,
no.
and it's about trust.
And it is your opinion that you don't have
Okay.
the trust.
And
Okay,
this,
and-
well, Attorney Sacco said we're not required. Well, my position is, I'm not gonna take this, okay?
All right.
Let's, if I could have Mary, just
Please, thank
say
you.
a word
So
here.
I'm here actually to represent, I guess, all of the members. Tim Barrows was going to be here today to represent the Florida Housing Authority, and unfortunately, his brother passed away last evening. So he's unable to attend, and David Sullivan didn't have someone else to send from the accounting department that really knew enough about GASB 68 to speak on the matter. Debbie Kenny is on vacation from Diamond, so she was unable to attend as well. So realistically, I'm here representing for the most part, the auditors of the Housing Authority, the auditors of Diamond Regional, and certainly the auditors of the City of Fall River, which you met last week, which is our last meeting, or a meeting several months ago, which is Clifton, Lawson, and Allen. SB 68, as you know, has been a topic of conversation in this boardroom several times. It is a requirement of the municipalities to record the net pension liability, as well as the deferred inflows and outflows as it relates to pension, as a result of changes in the auditing and accounting standards a couple of years ago. I agree to disagree, if you will, with members of your committee as well as with your attorney as to whether or not it's a requirement of this organization. So what we're proposing to do is, it is a requirement for each of the entities. So whether you want it to be a requirement or not, whether you believe that PERIC wants it to be included or not, this is not taking away from the work that PERIC has to do. It's adding to the work that the auditors have to include in their financial statements. So what we're proposing to do at this particular point is have you engage, in this particular case, the lead auditor, because it's 90% or so of the total, probably a little bit more than 90%. Have you engaged the City of Fall River's auditors to do the agreed-upon procedures, which they did in the prior year, at no cost to this organization. So they would be coming in anyway to do the information. The engagement letter in the fee section of the engagement letter would indicate that each of the members would be billed directly. So the members would agree to the fee, and they would be billed directly. So as Krishan just indicated, Fall River, Diamond, and the Housing Authority, for the most part, would get together and they would agree to a fee. Whatever that fee is, it has nothing to do with you, you won't be billed, the fee would be billed to them directly. You would only have one set of auditors in here looking at your books and records, which is probably easier on yourselves as opposed to having 3 sets of auditors in here. And then you would just represent to us, as you normally would anyway. You would represent to us, not myself, because I'm not the auditor, but me sitting here speaking on behalf of the participants. You would represent to the participants that you provided all the books and records that were necessary to do the engagement. As simple as that. The fiduciary numbers, the numbers themselves in terms of the investments, those are included in the city's financial statements as they have been for the last 30 years. Since the NCGA came into play, and maybe 40 years at this point. And the fiduciary, the trust fund, the pension trust fund, was included in the city's financial statements because you're a component unit. That has been included in the financial statements for the last, as I said, 30 or 40 years. And that will continue to be included in that fashion. What we're talking about here is the standard that came into play, SB 68, which now requires each of these entities, Diamond, the Housing Authority, and the city, to record their net pension obligation. One of the problems, we talked about the last time, maybe having multiple auditors, and, you said, well, Christine could entertain all the sets of auditors. One of the problems with having multiple sets of auditors, and I've had long conversations with the auditor for the Housing Authority, because they have a different fiscal year end, and those auditors also represent the New Bedford Housing Authority. So it's the same auditors that do New Bedford Housing Authority that do Fall River. One of the problems is the allocation. It's almost like they would have to go back and look at the whole in order to determine that their percentage of the net pension liability, as well as the deferred inflows and outflows, is properly stated. So at the end of the day, it makes more sense for one firm to do the whole and do a report, and then each auditor, so the auditors for the Housing Authority can rely on that report, they can drop in the numbers, they can reference that report when they put their information on the Housing Authority's financial statements, as well as Powers and Sullivan, who do the Diamond Regional High School, they can do the same. So they wouldn't have to be involved in the sense that you'd have one set of auditors, one report, the allocation being made based on the PERIC information. And the concern that it appeared that everyone had at this table the last time was, why should this retirement board incur the cost. And as your attorney has pointed out, and as your member has just pointed out, you don't believe that there's a requirement under the standard to report the net pension liability in the municipal financial statements, but I'm here to tell you there is a requirement.
Can I interrupt? That's not
Yes,
what,
please.
that's not what we've said, with all due respect.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood you then.
Yeah, let me be clear. GASB 68 places no legal obligation on a retirement system to do anything. You can disagree with that statement, but that's just not my opinion. That is fact. And we have a memorandum from our oversight authority which reiterates that. I've had personal conversations with the general counsel at PERAC as well as their lead actuary, both of whom agree that GASB 67 places obligations on retirement systems, GASB 68 places obligations on municipalities. In terms of providing information to the municipalities or the member units of the system, I don't think I've ever heard, unless there have been other discussions in which I was not involved, that this board would not do anything other than cooperate with providing information. That's not the issue. We certainly would be obligated to provide any documents that are public records. If there are records that would need to be reviewed to complete the process that are exempt from disclosure under the public records law, we would need to have a confidentiality agreement with the audit firm doing the work. But there's a big difference between an obligation to pay for the work, which is another subject, or to provide information. And I don't think anybody on the board, and certainly I've never said that we don't have any obligation to provide information. We have obligation to comply with the public records law, and I think the board, I can speak for the board, that they certainly are happy to cooperate to help the city and the other member units to fulfill their obligations under GASB 68. Now, what I think I heard you say this morning was that the proposal was for the one auditor to do the work. Whatever the cost is for that work is going to be borne by the 3 member units, and that we would not be billed for it, that they would pay it directly. So that's very different than what I was reading in some of the emails and what had been proposed previously. My position on that is, if the board's not going to be charged, then there isn't an issue with an expenditure of system funds. So that's no longer a concern. The only concern that I have in terms of your request to have the board contract with the auditors is twofold. One, the auditors aren't providing a service to us. So we cannot, as an entity, contract with an outside vendor who's not going to provide a service to us. Number two, while there's some dispute whether or not the retirement board would have to go through the formal procurement process outlined in Chapter 32, Section 23B for auditing functions, PERAC, again, our oversight authority, has suggested at a minimum we would need to engage in some competitive process before we engage any vendor. And I concur with at least that aspect of the opinion, irrespective of what service the board seeks, it needs to engage in a competitive process to do so. So even if the board was willing to engage with your auditor, and I don't know that they are, or that they would need to engage the auditor who's performing really services for you and for the other 2 entities, it seems to me the only arrangement that needs to be made is that we need to make sure that any records that they view that are not public records, that they sign a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement. And then I think the board's happy to cooperate and give access to the auditors to do the work that they need to do. My position is simply that the board cannot expend funds for any purpose that is not in the administration of the retirement system, which this is not. So, the discussion we had the last time, at least when I was present, was that the request was for the retirement board to lay out the money initially. That sounds like that's not the position anymore.
No more.
Well,
I don't understand the need for the board to even contract.
Well, because
It doesn't make sense that the board
Just
would
to
need to
clarify
contract.
with Attorney Sacco, so what you're saying is, for us to provide public information, documents is fine, we're not bearing any cost. And to contract with someone, we need an RFP, but then again, we're not looking to contract with anyone because we don't have an obligation to do so, because they're not providing any service to us.
Correct. The only issue would be the access, because any auditor is going to, by necessity, look at documents that contain information that is not public information. So we would have to engage in some sort of confidentiality agreement whereby the auditor agreed not to use that information for any purpose other than preparing the reports that they need to comply with GASB 68.
The PERAC memo 20:2008 says, the retirement board must issue an RFP and advise the pay services to perform financial and management audits of the system. Secondly, I disagree with the characterization that everybody's agreed to split this by thirds, because it doesn't preclude any labor union, as we did in '91, to disagree with the way this is done and file a grievance, as we did in '91, and we prevailed, and say that this is not a fair and balanced billing. So the labor unions do have that right. It's part of their contractual package, and under 150E, it impacts them. Therefore, they have a right to file a grievance. And I will tell you, if we accept this liability, I'm gonna go right to the labor unions and tell them they should file a grievance as we did in '91.
I don't think the suggestion is that we're accepting any financial liability. And before I move on, is that correct?
So that's correct. So what I've proposed, because every one of these members need this information for their reports, as I've indicated. So what I've proposed is that the engagement letter clearly indicates in the fee paragraph that there is no liability to this retirement system, and that the liability, or the billing, if you will be to the members. Now, the members will then agree, or the units will then agree as to what that fee structure is. And it has nothing to do, and really wouldn't have anything to do with your negotiations into that fee structure.
So what is the purpose of
The engagement with the system.
the audit engagement with the retirement board? What are they doing for us?
The report has to be issued to someone, and the report has to have the allocation of all of the units. In the representation letter that you provided us with all the information, and the confidentiality is not a problem, I'm sure that the auditors would be happy to sign that. There has to be a representation letter signed that you've provided with us with all of the information, us being whoever the auditor is, because again, I'm here on the Housing Authority's behalf right now. So you provided the auditors with all of the information that is necessary, and that you sign it off. You sign a piece of the engagement letter, the representation letter now, as I understand it, for the city of the city of Fall River, which you should, because the trust fund is a significant part of it. And if you don't, I'm not sure why, so.
We never.
Okay, so
When would we have had
most
to
of
do
the
that? I don't know of
time-
any system that does that.
Most of the time, the management representation letters are signed by the city, the school department, any component units. If your current auditors don't ask you to do that, it's been common practice recently.
Well-
But that's not the issue, so let's not talk about the city's audit right now, that's not the issue. So the issue,
The issue is the cleanliness. And you can be as exasperated as you want. We have fiduciary responsibility. We also, I don't want to get bogged down at some point in time. Listen, I represent the retirees and the insurance advisory. There's 2,000 and some retirees. There's 5,000 active employees. If somebody sends the city a bill for an audit, and you tell me that I'm gonna pay half, and the city side's paying half, you can bet your bottom that I'm going to court. And if these labor unions accept this, they're nuts, because what happens if there is a grievance filed? Now, who are they gonna sue? The retirement board for doing the audit? Are they gonna sue you for splitting it 3 ways? There's something we don't need to assume this responsibility, and we don't need to deal with the financial liabilities of this. We've got enough fiduciary responsibility with this board. Our attorney says it's not a requirement. I trust our attorney, and that's all I'm gonna say about this.
Could I ask a question too? What is the legality about the board contracting with somebody and financially obligating another agency to, I mean, how can the board sign a contract saying the housing authority is gonna pay this?
we're not being-
They don't have that
Well, service
authority. It's
provided to
similar
us.
to the city can't
Right.
contract on behalf of the board. The board can't contract on behalf of its units.
So,
I don't understand why the city just doesn't work with the housing and thing and just enter into a contract and then the board sign a confidentiality agreement and give it access to the
Because-
auditing firm.
because the report has to be issued to the board. The issue is, the report has to be issued to, the audit report has to be issued to the board. And you will take that report and give it to each of the members. Because the allocated portion of the net pension liability is what is required, correct, to be included in their financial statement. So one report will be issued, and the report will have, and I don't have the percentages in front of me, but, 90% city, 5% housing, 5% diamond. It'll be one report, it will include each of the member units, and it will include the net pension liability, the deferred inflows, the deferred outflows, everything they will need. There will be no financial liability to this board.
So the easy resolution then is the entities contract with the auditors. The agreement says that the auditors will issue the report to us. That's their obligation to issue it to us. And then we in turn will take the report and
But who's-
disseminate it to the 3
But
units.
who's gonna sign the engagement letter? That's the issue.
Well, but we can't, again, I don't want to beat the dead horse, but we're not engaging the auditors to do anything because they're not performing a service for us. That's number one. And number two, as I said, whether or not the PERAC statement about an RFP is a legal requirement, I would, as a fiduciary, the board must go through some procurement process, whether it's the formal Section 23B process or an informal procurement process by which they issue a request for proposals and seek qualified vendors to respond. That would take a couple months. And there's no guarantee that they would end up with your auditor that is already working with you. So it seems to me that the easy solution to this problem is for the 3 units that need this information to engage the auditor, decide among themselves how that cost of that audit is going to be allocated. The report can be sent to the retirement system and the retirement board can then disseminate that report as done by your auditors to your units for the purpose that it was contracted to do. I don't see how we need to be involved in any of this other than providing information and access to information to allow the auditors to do what they need to do to satisfy the employer's requirements.
Okay, so if I go back to both the Housing Authority, the city, of course, and Diamond, and represent that to them, I don't know how they'll feel about it, but I will go back and represent that to them. Can I assume at that particular point that this retirement board would be obligated and willing to sign the management representation letter, saying that you've provided us with all of the information that's available and that you didn't withhold any information for us to do our due diligence in our reporting?
I'll defer to the board on that. I mean, I
think
all we can represent is that we've made information available that they've requested.
We always have, right?
Which
yeah.
I mean, certainly.
If it gets to the point where they need to come in, that's when a confidentiality agreement will become important, because there is a lot of information that is included on the information we provided last year that we had to redact from all the records before they could be copied and scanned and sent over. So that's why, it probably would be beneficial to the auditing firm to have a confidentiality agreement with the board so that they can actually come in and review the records, as opposed to having to send the list, have us scan them and send them over to them.
But if they were to
Which-
do that, if they were to send us a list, as we would do in any situation, whether it was a litigation response for discovery for records, we're gonna represent that, you know, to the best of our knowledge and good faith, all the documents that have been requested have been provided. I mean, that's easy, and that shouldn't be an issue. But anyway, I don't said my piece in terms of the legal aspects of it. I'll defer back to the board for however they want to proceed.
Okay. Everybody done?
Well, so what are we getting from, what's the expectation from the board?
Well, from my
From
point
your
of view, in
point of view.
terms of the Housing Authority, of course, is the first set of, or the first unit that needs this information in their financial statements. So they had a March 31st year end, their auditors are presently trying to get their audit done, so they need this information. So if this board is not interested in doing the combined engagement letter, I will take that information back to the sets of auditors. I think it's Healy and Company, which represents the Housing Authority, Powers and Sullivan, which represents the Diamond Voc, and then Clifton Lawson and Allen, who you met the last time, that
Right.
represents the city, and indicate to all three of them that you're not willing to prepare an agreed upon procedures report jointly with regard to engaging with one set of auditors. I will see what they think with regard to that. The only other alternative, and I'm not even sure how this would work, but if I put my auditor's hat on, because as you know, my firm does auditing as well. If I put my auditor's hat on, I don't know whether we could have an engagement letter signed by the three entities, which I'm thinking maybe that's the way we would have to go.
Yeah.
But the representation letter, we would have to be sure that that representation letter was signed by this entity, because each of the entities, the city, Diamond, and the Housing Authority, have no way of saying that all the information was provided and no information was withheld. And so the biggest problem with all this, with the net pension liability, is making sure the census data is correct. And that's when it comes to GASB 67 and GASB 68, what really came of all of this was, is this net pension liability calculated correctly? Are the assumptions that this board presented to, in your case, PERIC, because they do your actuary, were those assumptions properly utilized in calculating that net pension liability? Was the weighted average correctly used when looking at the interest rates in that calculation? That's what these new audit procedures are. Is the payroll correct? So is the payroll that is being presented by, we'll use Diamond for an example, is the payroll that's presented by Diamond to this board to be included in that census data correct? So the auditor would be going out to Diamond and selecting a payroll, a week of payroll or a selection of payroll, same thing with the Housing Authority and the city, of course. And those auditors, whoever they are, we'll assume Clifton Lawson and Allen at the moment because they're the city's auditor, and it would appear, based on discussions with both the Housing Authority and with Powers and Sullivan from Diamond, that they're willing to allow Clifton Lawson to do it, because again, one firm should be doing this. It shouldn't be done by three separate firms, because the only way three separate firms can do this, if you will, is if they're all in the room at the same time, because you gotta look at the allocation. The biggest chunk of this is, you wouldn't wanna, at the end of the day, have 102% of the liability calculated, because one auditor looked at it one way and came up with one percentage, another auditor looked at it another way, and we're at 102%, or
98%.
98%. So it only makes sense for one auditor to do the whole in terms of the allocation, and then share it. So if you're not willing to contract with a no-fee clause, then I would say, I will go back to each of them and say, can you contract with each of them as a whole, maybe one engagement letter that the three of them sign, but the representation letter would still have to come back here, because there is no other person or entity able to sign the representation letter. What I would probably suggest is that the representation letter has multiple signatures on it, because the payroll information would require the entities to respond to that information, if you will, and the retirement information would be your signature. So I would almost think that that rep letter, again, this is my auditor's hat and not my representation hat from the city, but my auditor's hat would be, I would think you'd want, 4 signatures on that rep letter, because you're getting information from multiple locations in order to do the 805 report and do the
Who
reporting.
presents that representation letter? It would be the auditing firm, so they would know the places they received it, so I would think that they would have
I would
every
think
entity that
Christine.
they-
I agree. I
on
would think
there, and
Christine.
it's
I'm
just a
not
matter of
representing
submitting it
Chris
to
Lawson and
the
Alan here today,
Yeah.
but I would think that, Chris Rogers would want that on the representation letter, because again, that information, payroll information would be coming from the Housing Authority as well as from Diamond, so I would think he'd want 4 signatures on it, but that's just me sitting here with my auditor's hat on.
Attorney Sacco, just quickly from your opinion, so one engagement letter to those 3 entities doesn't seem to be a problem from a legal standpoint.
However they want to contract it.
Right, because it
Because it's separate
takes
from
us,
us.
correct.
Right, so that's not a problem.
And then the representation letter,
We certainly would represent that we can represent that the information that we provide was accurate.
right, you have public information.
But to the extent that, we're also, as always, we're relying on information that's being provided to us, that
correct.
we're not independently auditing. So, not to get into the weeds on the legalese, but I would want to make sure whatever representation the board makes
Right.
is qualified such that we've been provided information that's been represented to us as accurate. Whatever information that is generated from us
Okay.
is reflective of that, and then that should be satisfactory for the auditors. They should be, I don't disagree that this is an imperfect process, and that it shouldn't be done 3 times. But it doesn't need to be done 3 times. You have 3 firms, no disrespect, all of whom are looking for fees to perform work. It's the same work that needs to be performed only once. So it certainly makes sense from a cost standpoint for one audit firm to do the work, and that cost to be allocated however the parties deem it appropriate amongst themselves. And we provide access to one audit firm as necessary, and to the extent that there's a need for a review of non-public information, there's a disclosure agreement.
Okay,
I've done this with other municipalities, it has not been a problem.
okay, that's
Okay,
good.
Mr. Camara.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make a motion that we, in the form of a motion, that the city, we don't do this, the city does it, and this is not gonna be the perfect motion, but we'll get the spirit of the motion, and that, the board and our attorney give them any documentation or sign anything they need, but the liability for this contract still remains with the city and not with the retirement board. And when they meet with those entities, I would like you to ask if they'll assume 1/3 of the cost of the unfunded liability of the system, and see if they agree to that.
Well, that's the whole point of this, sir, is that the liability has to be allocated based on the percentage, the allocated percentage based on the active employees and as well as the retired employees to calculate that net
Well,
pension
thank you,
liability.
madam, for that information.
So it's
So
not a
is the
third
bill
each.
based on the individual per capita? No, it isn't. So that doesn't reflect that theory, does it?
Well,
I got a motion on the floor.
And your motion would be
Restate them
to
all, right.
not engage
Yep.
in an audit agreement with,
Letter, correct. Not engage in an agreement letter, but have a representation letter.
Whatever's
Reviewed by
necessary.
Attorney Sacco.
Yeah, let's make it.
With no cost being
add
paid
to
by the
that,
retirement board.
The retirement board will
Bond.
sign off on the representation letter
form.
as a de minimis.
Once reviewed by Attorney Sacco.
With
Correct.
the affirmation of the attorney.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you restate that motion?
Yeah,
I
try.
had 3 people going, so we gotta put it, we gotta get this, we wanna try to get it right. All right. The board will not engage in an agreement letter with City of Fall River auditing firm for purposes of GASB 68 requirements. Provided, however, that, the board will
We'll cooperate with the process and provide all the information.
Yeah.
Public information.
And sign off on the representation letter. Would that work? You think so?
I believe so.
Yep.
After review of Attorney Sacco.
Good, you got all that, Chris?
wait a minute,
Okay.
public information?
And as the board has always done,
Public
Okay.
add that last line, please.
Okay.
I don't like the implication that we don't cooperate.
Yeah, because it's pretty obvious that we do.
And will sign off. And we'll sign off on what?
Representation letter.
Representation letter.
So you're not willing to sign off on the engagement letter,
Right.
but you are saying that yes, we will provide all
All
information that is
after.
requested, and we are not withholding any information.
Correct.
Review and recommendation.
I don't
By
think we
board
put that in the
counsel.
motion, that we're gonna not withhold any information. I think that's.
No,
kinda-
I'm just explaining.
That's just,
Yeah.
I don't.
All
want
right.
that in the
Signing
motion.
of the
I don't-
representation
Okay,
letter.
so do we
is-
have a motion from Mr. Kamara to not engage in an agreement letter with the City of Fall River auditing firm for the purposes of GASB 68 requirements, provided, however, that the board will provide all public information, as the board has always done, and will sign off on representation letter after review and recommendation by board
No, it
counsel?
could be non-public information too, if you're.
No, they would have to sign a confidentiality agreement.
Yeah, that could be part of that too.
But
It has to be all information.
Also, all
because-
information, it's not public information only.
we amend the motion to provide all information upon,
Yes.
upon receipt
I will
of a
amend,
signed
yeah.
confidentiality
Any
agreement.
and all information, if there's any
Correct.
associated
Right. All
agreements they have to make,
information
like waivers, and they can do whatever they want.
upon receipt of a
Kamara, it's a very long motion you just made.
Make it a bullet points, you know.
It's a combo one.
As long as the spirit of the motion is
With T.
understood, and
Yep.
it's on,
You
so we can always rerun it.
Um,
Legislative intent.
All right. To not engage in an agreement letter with the City Fire Auditing Firm for purposes of GASB 68 requirements. However, the board will provide all information upon receipt of a signed confidentiality agreement, as the board has always done, and will sign off on representation letter after review and recommendation by board counsel.
You have a motion.
Got a motion?
So moved.
Bob?
Second,
And
all in
Dave.
favor?
Aye.
Motion passes
Pass 5-0.
unanimously.
Chris, we have the fire chief. Do you want to suspend the go into?
Thank you,
I need to get
everyone.
him.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I will
He might have
pass
brought
that
it
on to the
down.
housing authority,
Did he?
because they have
Oh,
to
it's
watch
part of
I'm
that.
gonna go out and see if he's out.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
we're just gonna wait 1 minute for,
We're going to do the superannuation.
let's get him off.
Okay.
Convey my condolences to Tim.
Excuse me.
Yes,
If you
yes.
please, Staff.
I will. Thank you.
Can we, I'd like to make an amendment to the agenda. Mr. Norman Souza, he has rescinded his retirement application, so he can come off of the list if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Fortunately, we did it after. I did the agenda.
Chris.
Hmm?
That name. Damone.
You don't have to.
Okay.
You can just do them all as a group. Yeah, do them all if you like. Is he still here?
He even got a water star. He's gone.
Yeah, okay. I'll call him. I was gonna call him after anyways. I didn't think he'd be
Be
here.
perfectly truthful, I don't know what the heck he's, I mean, he's got a stack of records this big. The only thing that matters is the medical panel.
Okay, moving on to item number 6 on the agenda, retirement application superannuations. Motion to accept.
Motion.
Motion
Second.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Great. We had tabled items. Notification of termination, section 91A, non-compliance.
Okay, the board last month tabled any action on all but Michael Fernandez's termination. We have received compliance letters on all but Mr. Bergeron. Robert Bergeron is still not in compliance. We did receive all of the last 5 years' worth of paperwork. He came in and he just wouldn't fill them out. All I can do is recommend the board, continue the termination of his allowance until he becomes in compliance.
Yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense.
Motion.
Motion.
He was here last
Mr.
time.
Nasser.
Second, yeah.
Second,
All in favor?
Kamara, all in favor?
Aye.
This is unanimous. Next item is board to determine if drug testing stipend for a police department contract.
Oh, we haven't received anything on
We
that yet?
haven't received any of that?
No.
Okay.
We have not, the last notice we received was an acknowledgement letter from PERAC dated June 9th, 2016, just indicating that they've received our request for their advisory opinion, but it has not issued, so
Okay.
just recommendation and leave that on the table.
Okay. Motion to table? Continue?
So
No,
moved.
no,
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 Second.
make a motion.
No need.
Stay, just stays there.
No,
All right,
Nope,
good.
don't need any motion, just to leave it on the table.
All right, we'll go to item number 8. Okay, pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, the board will convene an executive session to review and discuss accidental disability retirement application of Donald Costa Jr. and Nicholas Sunnison, as this matter involves the physical and/or mental health of the applicants. The open meeting will not convene after the executive session. Like to hear a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Viana?
Yes?
Mr. Machado? Mr. Nasser?
Yes.
Mr. Gupta?
Yes, please.
Mr. Kamara?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Executive session at, close at 9:17.
17.